Hello, good evening, and welcome back. Police attempt to clear Extinction Rebellion protest camps in London, from The Guardian, just a couple of hours ago. And with anything like this, as Six X and Hammer 666 pointed out, and I think Tim Paul reiterated, that when you have any issue like this, you've got to ask yourself three questions. One, is it actually happening? Two, is it actually bad? And three, is it reversible by humans? Is it possible to be reversed? So the same thing here. So climate change, is it happening? Yeah, sure, the climate changes, but that's also partly down to the Milankovitch cycles. That is to say, how the Earth orbits the Sun. When it gets closer, it gets hotter. When it gets further away, it gets colder. Funny that it seems to track more with Milankovitch cycles than it does with things happening on Earth, but nonetheless, I guess that's just an inconvenient truth. Second, is it bad? Well, let's see. So historically, which were worse for humans, because that seems to be what Extinction Rebellion focused on. Cold periods or hot periods? Well, obviously cold periods, by a hell of a long way. Okay, because we can help people and keep them cool easier than heating them up. And so if Africa becomes uninhabitable, for example, then we have so much more farming land, let's say in Canada and Alaska, and then Greenland and Iceland and Northern Europe, and then there are so many more impossible places to grow. And in any tundra through the north, then yes, that will now become arable farming land, and you can grow there instead. So it just shifts the process of food growing away. But if you really want to stop this problem, then what is the best answer? Well, it's just reducing the amount of people. So that is going to happen inevitably anyway. From what I've seen, heard and read, that will peak at about 9 billion and then drop off from there. The reason being that more economically developed countries tend to have fewer children. That's just the way that it goes. And this is seen, let's say, you could compare Victorian England to modern day England, with very large families because they knew the infant mortality was so high, to now. And in fact, in places like Africa, the infant mortality rate is down to what the Western world had it in the 1950s. So the replacement rate has increased, sure, but then the amount of children being born is decreasing as well. The families are shrinking as it becomes more reliable, in which case we're going to see soon the population decrease anyway, so we don't really have to worry about it. If you are concerned about the environmental factors as well, that is mainly only applicable for societies, communities, which have progressed to the point at which you can actually have a choice about it. You have to be quite middle class to even care about the environment, otherwise you're just caring about getting by. Do you think most of Africa and India actually care about the environment, or you think they just care about living? Because until you can persuade them that it's better off that they suffer for the greater good, that ain't going to happen. And people are good at self-preservation, so you're not going to persuade them. And sure, you can try, but then you'll just be imperialistic, and that's what you oppose, because for some reason, then, well, we used to be the hippies, I suppose, and for fighting for climate change and the trees, man. Let's not get started on Brazil and how the Congo is burning more. But in that case, why do they then seem to lean with communism as well? I'm not quite getting at. Unless they understand that to enact any reasonable change, you have to have governmental control. Although, obviously, you could just look at what capitalism has achieved and how our pollution has decreased just down to the free market, substantially as technology has improved, because we want more efficiency, and if we create something more efficient, there are going to be less byproducts. Some of the byproducts are, of course, pollutants. So, I mean, we're heading towards fusion reactors instead of fission. So, if you don't like nuclear, that'll be fine, because soon nuclear radioactivity won't be such an issue, because instead of having the byproducts from uranium-235 and 238, and of course we pick that instead of thorium because we need the plutonium for our nuclear weapons. But once we move on to making helium by combining hydrogen, which is much more difficult, but obviously we're going to get there anyway, then there will be no harmful byproducts, because you'll be creating helium, which is good because we're losing it anyway, so it's bloody expensive, and America has a massive vault of it. But what's also interesting to see is that the tide is turning for Extinction Rebellion support. obviously you got a load of support from Labour, so the Greens party shouldn't really exist, and they've only got one MP anyway with Caroline Lucas down in Brighton. But seeing as they're joining together, they might as well dissolve and re-emerge as one. But also you're saying that Sadiq Khan is kind of beginning to turn against Extinction Rebellion, and so you're starting to get the thoughts, as ingest as they might be, that this is just a 4chan false flag attempt, because Extinction Rebellion has become a net negative for the climate change movement, or climate change prevention movement, even though change is inevitable but progress is optional. So he's saying, well, actually this is doing a really bad job for London, because of course these middle class people are just protesting where they are, and that's the wealthier part and that's the more productive part, and therefore this is causing quite a big problem. And if Sadiq Khan is not seen to be fixing the problem that he is partially responsible for, then of course he's going to be losing support. So now he kind of has to decide, well, hang on, I'm not going to support this anymore. Oh dear. And some Labour members are also turning against them, which is lovely to see. But let's read on to see what they've been up to. So they say police have begun attempting to clear Extinction Rebellion protest camps from around Westminster as they imposed a Section 14 order banning demonstrations across central London. Arrests were made under the order from early on Tuesday morning, beginning at the movement's westernmost encampments on Millbank and moving into Whitehall in the late afternoon, where hundreds of tents had been pitched outside Downing Street. Officers gradually pushed their way up Whitehall, refusing to allow anyone bearing exile insignia through the lines and trying to filter them out of passing tourists and government workers. But cool, so they took out a load of their tents. Good, because why not? Then they talked to some individuals who had nothing interesting to say. So at 5:30pm, the Met announced it had made 212 arrests, making a total of 531 over the 2 days of protests so far. It is understood. So good, well done, you're actually doing your job, and you're preventing these people from causing such a big mess, seeing as it's much hoo-ha over nothing. We've been told, well, originally it started off by saying, oh, there's global cooling, and then realising that wasn't working, it was global warming, and then realising that wasn't actually coherent. They said, oh, it's climate change, and therefore if anything good happens, that's the Earth trying to rectify itself, or that we haven't gone that far off the deep end now, but if anything bad happens, that's because of climate change. So it's all confirmation bias. And when these protesters are apparently saying that they like the police and they're doing it for their children, as they have in one of the quotes here, they're saying, police, we love you, we're doing this for your children. I pity these people. I think that they may actually think that they're well-intentioned, but they just don't understand what's going on. And the same thing goes for when they say, oh, veganism is definitely the way forward. As I mentioned in one of my previous videos, that agriculture is responsible for between 2 and 52% of greenhouse emissions, depending on how you view it. But if you actually want to say, well, let's take in some, if we offset the positives that agriculture has for greenhouse emissions, because they eat the parts of food that people don't, and they're needed to make land arable again in order to grow crops, then they're neutral, if not positive. So how about that? That sure, maybe you don't want as many people eating meat. If you want, that's just less food waste, and that's good. I mean, we've seen now, funnily enough, that there's a bigger problem with abundance than there is about not enough. So when you say, oh, well, there's, there are too many people because there's starvation and overpopulation, so we'll know there isn't. There are more people suffering from obesity than starvation. So no, it's just maybe a misallocation because of, because of capitalism, because of free markets, because of it going where the desire and infrastructure is there, and people who are willing to pay for the cost of it. And that's of course why we see people deciding to try to move from their third world countries into better countries, because they know that they can have a much easier way of life, a lot cheaper and easier, and without doing anything. But let's finish this off to say what they're going to move on to. In a statement circulated through social media, the group said the plan is to do a Hong Kong-style occupation of the terminal building of London City Airport, planned to last 3 days. Lying, sitting or gluing on in front of the departure and arrival gates. If we fail to get inside, we'll blockade the space outside the doors, as this poses no risk to the airfield safety itself. The action is non-violent, safe and open to everyone. Well, Okay, so essentially you're just trying to be a nuisance. You're not going to get any support doing it this way. Your best bet is to actually have some coherent arguments based in fact and not just fictitious, but then again, I suppose that was never their strong point, in which case they're just going to piss off even more people. So I suppose for anybody with half a brain, this is actually useful, because then more people are going to say, I wish you would just fuck off. You're not actually helping. And maybe, just maybe, then people will be more inclined to actually look into climate change and what's happening and the effects and who's making it happen, and realise, hey, hang on, we're fine. We barely need to change anything. I mean, it's so easy and so likely to rectify itself anyway. And the biggest contributors are, of course, China and India. So, seeing as they don't care for UN agreements, obviously the Paris Climate Accord with China, saying yes, we're going to reduce our emissions within the next few decades, well, by 2030, so next decade, by exactly the amount we had planned to beforehand. So we're not actually cutting it for you, it's just what we think is going to happen. But now you seem to like us, so hey, you seem to be singing our praises. Isn't that easy? That's very, very simple and straightforward, and good for China, I suppose. They're the useful idiots, as they would say. But anyway, let me know what you think down below. Am I being too cynical, saying that these Extinction Rebellion protesters are full of shit? Or am I being too optimistic, saying that people are catching on that they are full of shit? Or somewhere in the middle. Do let me know if you think that their tactics are going to be successful, or if people are sick of it, seeing as even Sadiq Khan is turning on them. And I'm always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you for the continued support. Like, comment, share this video around. It does really help the channel. We're slow and steady, but we will get there. So thank you, and have a good evening.